I sold a dresser on Facebook Marketplace once. That's it. That's the whole beginning of this story, and I need you to sit with how small that sounds, because that's exactly what let it happen. Nobody warns you about the small things. They warn you about dark parking lots and strange men in vans. Nobody warns you about a dresser. It was an old piece of furniture, oak, a little scratched up, something I'd had since college and finally didn't need anymore. I took 4 photos in decent light, wrote a description, listed it for $60, and went to bed. By morning, I had 11 messages. That's normal for Marketplace. People lowball you. People ask if it's still available 40 seconds after you post it. People ask you to hold it and then vanish forever. I've sold a dozen things that way. It's usually boring. That's the point I need you to understand. It's usually so boring you stop being careful.
One of the messages was from an account with no profile picture, just the default gray silhouette and a name that could have belonged to anyone. He asked if the dresser was still available, and when I said yes, he asked for my address so he could map the drive. That's a normal question. People ask that all the time before committing to buy something heavy that they'll have to load into a car. I gave him my street name and a rough cross street, the way I always do at first. Not my exact house number, just enough for him to guess the neighborhood and decide if the drive was worth it. He wrote back within a minute. He gave me my own exact address, full house number, correct spelling of the street. He said, "Just want to make sure I've got the right one written down," like he was confirming something I'd already told him, except I hadn't. I remember staring at that message for a long moment, the way you stare at a math problem that doesn't add up no matter how many times you check it, because there was no version of the conversation where I had given him that number. I scrolled back through our messages 3 times, certain I must have typed it without remembering, the way you sometimes do 100 small automatic things online without registering them. I hadn't. The thread was right there, 4 short messages long, and nowhere in it did my address exist in any form more specific than a neighborhood and a rough direction. I even checked the app's location sharing settings, wondering if I'd somehow left something turned on that I didn't know about, some setting bleeding my location into the conversation without my noticing. Everything was off. Everything was exactly as private as I'd always assumed it was. I told myself there was a boring explanation. Maybe I'd posted my address somewhere before without remembering. An old listing, a public record, one of those data broker sites that scrapes your information and sells it in a package with your name and every address you've ever lived at. I've looked myself up on those sites before. It's not hard to find people that way if you know where to look, and there's a whole industry built on the fact that most of us don't know we're findable. So I let it go. I told myself this is just Marketplace being Marketplace, and people who buy furniture off strangers are already a slightly strange bunch to begin with. We agreed on a pickup for Saturday at 11 in the morning. Saturday came, 11 came, and went, and he never showed. No message, no explanation, nothing. That happens constantly with Marketplace, so I didn't think much of it. I relisted the dresser that afternoon and moved on with my day.
He showed up on Tuesday. Nobody scheduled Tuesday. Nobody agreed to Tuesday. I was in my kitchen around 6 in the evening when I heard a knock, and I opened the door expecting a package or a neighbor, and there was a man standing on my porch I had never seen in my life, next to a pickup truck idling in my driveway, saying, "I'm here for the dresser." I told him the pickup had been Saturday, that he never showed, that I'd already relisted it. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I can only describe as mild disappointment, the kind of look you'd give a vending machine that ate your dollar, and said, "Saturday didn't work for me, today's better," as though I had simply misremembered our arrangement, as though the actual agreed time was some minor detail he was gently correcting me on. I told him the dresser was already sold to someone else, which wasn't quite true yet, but felt like the fastest way to end the conversation, standing in my doorway with a stranger and his truck in my driveway. He nodded slowly, looked past me into my house for just a beat too long, long enough that I noticed it and my stomach dropped, and said, "No worries, I'll check back." Then he got in his truck and left, and I stood in my doorway for a long time after the taillights disappeared, feeling a specific kind of unsettled that I didn't have words for yet. I want to walk you through what happened over the next 3 weeks, because it's the accumulation of small things that makes this story what it is, not any single dramatic moment. Small things are what makes this kind of situation built from. That's what makes it so hard to know when to be afraid.
4 days after he showed up uninvited, I found a folded note wedged into my front door. No envelope, just a piece of notebook paper. It said, "Still interested in the dresser if it's not gone. I can come by whenever works." He'd written a phone number under it. Not the account he'd messaged me from on Marketplace, a different number entirely, handwritten, like he wanted me to have a way to reach him that existed outside the platform, outside any record either of us could point to later. I stood on my porch holding that note for a long time, turning it over in my hands like it might explain itself if I looked at it from a different angle. The handwriting was neat, careful even, the kind of handwriting people use when they're being deliberate about how a note looks, not the fast scrawl of someone jotting something down on their way past. That carefulness bothered me more than the note itself. It meant he'd taken his time. It meant this hadn't been an impulsive stop on his way somewhere. He'd planned to leave something, and he'd planned what it would say. I didn't call the number. I blocked his Marketplace account instead, deleted the conversation, told myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. 9 days after the note, I came home from work to find my dresser gone from my porch, where I'd set it out with a free sign after finally selling it to someone else who'd actually shown up and taken most of it, leaving one drawer behind because it didn't fit in their car. I hadn't thought much about the leftover drawer sitting by my door. It disappeared sometime that day, and normally I wouldn't think twice about a stranger taking a free item off a porch. Except 2 days later, that drawer showed up back on my porch, cleaned, refinished almost, the old scratches sanded down, a fresh coat of something that made the wood look better than it had in years. No note this time, just the drawer, sitting exactly where the dresser used to be, like a gift or a message or both. I called the police for the first time that day. I explained the address he'd known before I gave it to him, the uninvited visit, the note, and now this. The officer who came out was polite, wrote everything down, told me that unfortunately none of what I'd described crossed the legal threshold for anything they could act on yet. No threats, no trespassing they could prove, nothing that violated a law as written. Just a series of things that were deeply unsettling without being illegal. He told me to keep documentation of everything, which I did obsessively, screenshotting messages I no longer had, writing down dates from memory, trying to build a timeline out of a situation that refused to hold a clear shape. I started noticing his truck, or a truck that looked like his, the same dark color, the same slightly raised back end, parked at different points around my neighborhood over the following 2 weeks. Never directly outside my house, always half a block away, or across the street and down 2 houses,
Or once, memorably, in the parking lot of the grocery store I go to on Thursdays, which is not close to my house, which is not somewhere he should have had any reason to expect me. I don't know if it was always his truck. I want to be honest about that. There are a lot of dark trucks in the world, and fear does strange things to how certain your eyes become about ordinary objects. But I stopped going to that grocery store on Thursdays. I switched to a different one on a different day, and I never told anyone why, because saying it out loud made me feel like I was building a conspiracy out of parking spots. I did mention it eventually to my neighbor across the street, an older man who's lived on the block longer than I have and notices everything, the kind of person who knows which cars belong on the street and which ones don't. I asked him carefully, trying not to sound as unraveled as I felt, if he'd seen a dark truck parked around lately that didn't belong to anyone on the block. He said he had, twice actually, both times in the evening, both times the driver just sitting there for a while before pulling away, never getting out, never doing anything he could point to as suspicious enough to mention on his own. Figured it was someone's contractor, he told me, or somebody waiting on a kid. That's the trouble with all of this. Every single piece of it, taken alone, has a boring explanation. It's only when you line them up end to end that the boring explanations stop covering the whole shape of what's happening.
3 weeks after he first showed up, I came home to find something sitting on my porch that made the fear in my chest turn into something colder and more specific. It was a second piece of furniture, not mine, a small side table, oak, similar grain to the dresser I'd sold, refinished in the exact same way the drawer had been, sanded and coated until it looked new. There was no note. There didn't need to be one anymore. The message had stopped needing words. It had become a kind of ongoing conversation conducted entirely through objects left on my porch, each one a little more personal, a little more clearly made, a little more clearly saying, "I am still here, and I am still thinking about you, and I know exactly where you live." I changed my locks that week. I installed a doorbell camera, the kind that records and sends alerts to your phone. And for the first few nights I barely slept, checking it every time it buzzed, which was constantly, because it buzzes for wind and passing cars and delivery drivers and every small ordinary movement a normal street produces when you're not watching for one specific kind of danger inside it. 11 days after the side table appeared, the camera caught him. 2 in the morning, a man walking slowly up my driveway, stopping at the edge of my porch light, standing there for almost 4 full minutes without moving, without knocking, without doing anything except standing at the boundary of where the light stopped and looking, as far as the angle let me tell, directly at my front door. Then he turned and walked back down the driveway and out of frame, unhurried, the same unhurried walk he'd had the first time he showed up in daylight, asking for a dresser I'd already told him was gone. I finally had something concrete, footage, a timestamp, a face, clear enough this time that the police took it seriously in a different way than they had the folded note or the mysteriously refinished furniture. They ran the plate on the truck that had shown up in earlier footage from a neighbor's camera down the street. It came back registered to an address 2 towns over, to a man with no prior record, nothing that would have flagged him as dangerous before any of this happened. When they went to talk to him, he told them, calmly, that he'd simply been checking on an old purchase, that he didn't understand why anyone was upset, that he'd never actually broken into anything, never touched anything that wasn't left outside for free, never done anything he considered wrong. He was issued a formal warning. A restraining order followed a few weeks later once I filed the paperwork with everything documented.
As far as I know, he hasn't come back since. The truck hasn't reappeared in my neighborhood, at least not that I've noticed, though I'll admit I still look for it sometimes, still feel my chest tighten at the sight of any dark pickup slowing down my street. The officer who eventually spoke with him told me one more thing afterward that I've turned over in my mind more than almost anything else in this whole story. When they asked him directly why he kept coming back, why he'd left a refinished drawer and then a table, why he'd stood in my driveway at 2 in the morning without knocking, he apparently said that he liked finishing things properly, that the dresser deal had been left unresolved in his mind, and he didn't like unresolved things. He framed the whole 3 weeks not as pursuit, but as a kind of tidiness, a loose end he was determined to close, regardless of what I wanted or how many times I'd already told him, in every way I knew how, that the deal was over.
Here's what stays with me, though. More than the fear of him coming back. It's the version of this story that almost happened instead. If he hadn't left that first note, if the camera hadn't caught a clear angle that night, if any of the small, strange details along the way had been slightly less obvious, slightly easier to explain away as coincidence, I don't know how long this would have gone on before it became something I couldn't walk back from. I think about how close the whole thing came to staying invisible, a string of things I noticed and doubted and explained to myself one at a time, each one on its own, small enough to dismiss, all of them together forming a shape I almost didn't see until it was standing on my porch at 2 in the morning. I still sell things on Marketplace sometimes. I've changed how I do it, though. I never give out my exact address until someone's actually on their way. I meet in public parking lots for anything small enough to carry, and for anything too big to move without someone coming to the house, I ask a friend to be there with me. It feels excessive sometimes, meeting a stranger in a grocery store parking lot to hand off a lamp worth $15. But I've learned that the value of the item was never really the thing being negotiated in any of this. If you sell things online and a stranger seems to know more about you than the conversation should have given them, don't wait for a second sign to take it seriously. The first one is usually the only warning you get before the small things stop staying small.